Thank you so much for listening to KZSC's Voces, Críticas tonight. I am your producer and host, Silvana Falcone. And today I've got Dr. Molly Talcott on the line. We're going to talk about all that's happened this week. It's been quite a week in the news. Molly Talcott is an anti-racist feminist teacher, scholar, and union organizer. She is an Associate Professor of Sociology at California State University, Los Angeles, Associate Vice President of the California Faculty Association, which is the largest higher education faculty union in the United States, and co-founder of LUCI, LUCI, the Los Angeles Union Cooperative Initiative. She is co-editor with me, actually, of New Directions in Feminism and Human Rights, which was published in 2011. Her two current projects examine academic freedom and worker cooperative organizing as they intersect with racial and gender justice. I'm so delighted to have you here on the show with me, Molly. Welcome to KZSC's Voces Críticas.
It's wonderful to be on with you.
Well, what a week, Molly. Where do we even begin? But I guess first I want to get your reaction to the conviction of Paul Manafort and the guilty plea of Michael Cohen.
What a week indeed. So part of me thinks it's about time, and I'm thinking karma is catching up to these selfish, greedy, egomaniacal crooks, at least a couple of them. Although apparently, I guess, there's now 5 felony convictions associated with the Trump administration. You know, I'm sort of losing track of all the crooks, but they're starting to really, as Malcolm X would say, right, the chickens are starting to come home to roost. So that's wonderful. I think, of course, there has to be accountability happening. A couple things that I'm also beginning to worry about. You know, I'm really wary of the discussion in sort of liberal, moderate circles about are institutions holding up? Are they strong enough? Do we still have a liberal democracy? I haven't seen it yet, but I think as the convictions and the accountability continues to roll forward, I'm sort of concerned that some of the more establishment liberals and moderates will say, hey, look, our institutions are strong. We still have a functioning justice system. So I think those of us who oppose U.S. imperialism and the systems and the institutions that hold white supremacy and patriarchy in place also need to be ready to challenge the tendency of those in the establishment to assert, see, we're okay, our institutions work. Because actually we know that our institutions, fail the vast majority of us. We have major anti-imperialist and anti-racist critiques of institutions like the FBI and the CIA and the justice system. And so I think that's also kind of on my mind, just thinking about next steps. There's no guarantees, but I do think that youth see that most of our institutions are failing them. And so I always take hope from what youth will do as we move forward. 2 more things. I think most elected Democrats are pretty much in denial about the depths of the crises we face. And so they'll probably want to say, see, these convictions prove that we're okay. But what I think is true is that a deeper transformation awaits us, and it needs to occur. We need to build it. And then the other thing on my mind is just elected Republicans who, to me, are just sycophant to the corporate capitalist state. They are such hypocrites, and even the ones who speak out really only do so on Twitter, and they tend to be the ones who aren't running for re-election. And in general, they're just so anxious to do the bidding of their donors. They're just chomping at the bit to transfer and concentrate even more wealth and power upward, that I'm just wondering how long they're going to continue to be apologists for 45 for such a nakedly corrupt and incompetent administration. I'd almost be embarrassed for them. But then, of course, I remember that the legacy of conservative politics has always been about concentrating power for wealthy white men and denying rights to the rest of us. What are you thinking?
I mean, I'm feeling the exact same way. I think this point around the institutions is so critical because just because it worked in this case, if you will, right, in terms of the conviction of Manafort and the way in which Mueller is running his investigation, we can't forget the legacy of COINTELPRO and the ways in which particular racialized bodies have been targeted by these institutions in such profound ways. And so I find myself hoping this works out, and then also don't forget that history. Although I have to say I was a little bit delirious when the conviction came through, and then an hour later the guilty plea, and I just said, finally, something is happening here. I'm so angry at the lack of integrity we're seeing. It is to such a degree that they are apologists, for 45 and his corrupt family, quite frankly. And I'm angry that we could have such a lack of integrity from elected officials and that this has gone on for as long as it's gone on. I mean, it's really hard to believe we're almost going on 2 years here. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you pointed to is really crucial. And I'm also oscillating, my sort of emotions and like what's happening next. And is he impeached yet? Let me check, what's the New York Times is reporting now or, whatever media outlet. And I think you're right. The sort of naked lack of integrity is maybe what's drawing me to have a little bit of admiration for, let's say, the Mueller investigation, because it does seem to be maybe there's a smart strategy afoot and maybe there's a fidelity to some measure of ethics, even though I wouldn't endorse a shoring up of our existing institutions, as you just pointed out. They're deeply racist and damaging. But I'm with you on this enthusiasm to holding this whole family, which is just no doubt engaged in a criminal enterprise. But I think even without those indictments of Cohen and Manafort, it's like we already knew 45 was a racist birther. Like he was redlining black people out of his real estate development decades ago. We know he's a sexually assaulting misogynist, right? We know he called for the death penalty of the Central Park Five back in the 1980s, and we could go on and on. So there's also a part of me that's like, oh, it takes this like tax evasion on the part of Cohen for us to get some accountability, and maybe that just speaks to deeply our institutions need to change.
And how deeply they favor this kind of behavior. I mean, You're absolutely right. The fact that Trump is who he is, not a shock to any of us who've ever followed and sort of seen his performance. I never watched, obviously, his reality show or any of that junk, but it was easy to see who he has always been, which is a very narcissistic and egocentric person. And his, children have followed in those footsteps. I mean, don't even get us started right on Don Jr. and Ivanka. Where do we even go? And Jared Kushner. I mean, the whole lot of them. But, this is not a family, right, that was ever known for its philanthropy or for doing sort of good in the world. They had always been known to be out for themselves. And so why wouldn't they be out for themselves now that they're in this particular position, right? Having now the power of this office backing up the corruption. I'm stunned at how blatant it is. Like, we've always known there has been forms of corruption and taking advantage of the office, but there were still nonetheless some sort of semblance of ethical standards. I think what's so sort of stunning to me is the explicit nature of the corruption, and it's pretty much in your face, and there's pretty much no one in the GOP that will stand up to it. And I thought there'd be at least some response to, you actually should not be spending all of your taxpayer money on all of your properties. Like, that actually is unethical. You need to reveal your tax returns. I mean, the fact that none of that happened to me, I think, is really just stunning. And it makes me think about 45's display of white male supremacy is actually on a whole other level that I think we have in some ways yet to theorize, because I don't think actually another Clinton, or even if it had been Pence, I'm not convinced they would have gotten away with as much rampant corruption as he has. I'm not sure what you think about that.
It is really astounding. And then, of course, I think of all the congressional Republicans who are just basically complicit in it. But it is sort of the audacity of something else, not hope, that's for sure. But
definitely not hope. Definitely not hope.
He's so, I keep saying nakedly. I watched part of his rally in West Virginia, and he just appeals so frankly to white grievance politics, and it's very frightening, because I'm almost more concerned and scared and just worried about how he's being received in that audience and what he's whipping up, and what kind of neo-fascist and sort of white grievance politics, anti-immigrant politics he's really promoting, not just drawing upon, but also promoting, advancing in the culture. And I think that is something that, as many people have said, this isn't a dog whistle, it's a bullhorn. So I think Naomi Klein said something about the way in which he has used the lessons of branding and marketing to his own advantage politically.
I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I read this, I think, in the Washington Post, an op-ed where we will survive this in some way, but will we survive what he's unleashed, right? That is actually what we need to be concerned about. The other piece that's kind of fascinating to me is how Hillary Clinton still remains this kind of rallying point at these rallies. I mean, the fact that he's even doing rallies, right, is just sort of atrocious. But the fact that she still is this rallying call for his base, I find stunning still so many years, literally years later. And I wondered what you think about this. Part of what I also hear in leftist circles is that there's still this equivalency that somehow Trump and Clinton are the same. And I'm troubled by this because I think we have seen something that's been unleashed here that I'm not convinced Clinton would have unleashed in the same way, but perhaps I'm not being critical enough. And I wondered what you think about this sort of idea or assertion that somehow Trump and Clinton are two sides of the same coin.
Right. No, that's a great question. And yes, the invocation of lock her up. I mean, at the very same moment that his, associates are being convicted of felonies is really troubling. And of course, it's embedded in sort of misogyny and some tendencies around whipping up fear and hatred. And that's very disconcerting. I've thought about other sociologists who study spaces like that, and I think, would I go to a Trump rally? That would be really a chilling space to be in. Now, as far as the false equivalency, which I would call it, in some parts of the left between Clinton and 45, I just dispute it. And I think there's a few reasons why. So I'm a member of the left, I would say the radical left. And, of course, that means I'm aware that whoever's elected U.S. president is the head of the largest and most violent apparatus the world has ever seen. Let's just be real. It's the U.S. empire. Our military occupies more than 70 countries. We have an arms trade that's responsible for untold suffering. I'm thinking about the 40 Yemeni kids who were killed in the bombing of that school bus that had U.S. weapons attached to it. So whoever is elected president is at the head of this beast. However, I'm also the kind of leftist who would rather win tangible gains in the direction of justice, in the direction of human rights, than just sort of be very pure and hanging out in a room with 8 other people. And so I think we on the left have to get real that although the values and the policies that many of us want are really popular, we're losing miserably at this point. I think it's going to change, but at this point, to radically change the world. There's real momentum. I'm thinking of the Democratic Socialists of America, Black Lives Matter, the Medicare for All movement, the immigrant rights movement, but we're not there yet. 2 more things. Harm reduction really matters. If Clinton were president, she would not be calling immigrants animals. She would not have appointed a cabinet full of people who run agencies that they actually want to destroy. Families would not be separated to the extent that they are. And 45 has been endorsing police violence. She at least gave lip service to challenging mass incarceration. And I think we could have pushed her further. I doubt she would have reinstated private prisons, lots of things. And I guess in the end, I just believe in us, believe in our movements to have learned the lesson from Obama that there are no saviors and that we have to push whoever is in power. And then finally, I would just say the administration in power helps to set the context for organizing. We'd be doing more to be building forward rather than just trying to hold the line against all of the white nationalist backlash, all of the environmental rollback. And this really matters. In Long Beach, down here in the Los Angeles area, a 57-year-old black man, Frederick Taft, was just killed at his family reunion party by a white supremacist. The police say they still haven't caught him. And I just think about, Frederick Taft might be alive if we didn't have a white nationalist in the presidency that is whipping up that kind of sentiment. So what do you think about the 2 sides of the same coin?
I feel like we wouldn't be having, Miller in the White House advising on immigration policy. We would never have had a Bannon at the helm there. So the fact that the White House had been open to so many openly embracing white nationalists and white supremacists, to me, that would not have happened under the Hillary Clinton administration. I think that the point that you're making also about all of these officials are flawed, right? And I think Obama had certain flaws that I think, we hadn't pushed him on. But I would much rather be fighting and organizing against a Clinton sort of wing than this. activist fatigue is sinking in. You see the terrorizing that's happening in communities and the impact on children. But it is a little bit breathtaking when I keep hearing this assertion that they're the same. And I think we have to have a real frank conversation that we can't engage in this act of false equivalency, that we actually have to be, very strategic and assertive in what we want, to the kind of world we want to live in. And it means that actually the woman who had this kind of wealth of experience, it does not by default somehow make her equivalent to the narcissist who had no experience, right? That this was also, to me, very, very troubling. You are listening to Dr. Molly Talcott, an Associate Professor of Sociology at California State University, Los Angeles, Associate Vice President of the California Faculty Association, which is the largest higher education faculty union in the United States, and co-founder of LUCI, the Los Angeles Union Cooperative Initiative. Well, we only got a few more minutes, but we've got to talk about our other favorite, or not so favorite white woman, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Where do we even begin with her? What can you say about her? Someone who can just lie without hesitation, without even looking uncomfortable. Every time she's at the podium, I literally feel insulted as a person who lives in this country, as a citizen of this country, to have her at that podium, disrespecting the reporters in there and just literally exuding such an investment in white femininity and in patriarchy. And, where do we start with Sarah?
Where do we start? Every time I hear Sarah Huckabee Sanders speak, I just need to call forth in my memory that there are women who are white anti-racist women like Mab Seagrass and Ann Braden and the white people I know and work with who are trying to dismantle white supremacy and patriarchy. Otherwise, I would fall into despair about how complicit white heterosexual women have been with white supremacy and patriarchy historically and to this day, and she's a perfect embodiment of it. And unfortunately, she has a lot of company in that administration. I'm thinking of Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education. I was thinking today about Wendy Vitter, who's one of 45's judicial nominees, who refused to say whether she supported the Brown v. Board decision. And so I think, look, white women have choices to make about with whom we align, and Sarah Huckabee Sanders has made the worst of choices. And she just continues to astound me with her arrogance, with her complicity. And I'm just curious how long she will stay in that role. She'll have a book deal, she'll be fine, but I do wonder how she sleeps at night. And I
do too.
Yeah. I was just thinking about when she was sort of roasted by the comedian Michelle Wolf for being a liar. And, the right really came to her defense. So she kind of became this sort of white damsel in distress being attacked by a mean liberal feminist. But then they also tried to use feminism and say, like, oh, Wolf's attacking her appearance and how sexist is that? She tries to perform this sort of innocent white supremacist femininity, and I just have no time for it. And that could take us into the politics of civility and incivility, and we could be here for hours.
We could be here for hours, but I think that's the term, white supremacist femininity, because she invokes that and seems to relish in that. I know you and I go back and forth on her. I'm like, oh my gosh, what is Sarah saying today? And to me, it's astounding. How does she sleep at night? And in many ways, as funny and amusing and as bizarre as Spicer was, he literally did physically look uncomfortable lying all the time. She does not. Right. She seems to very much be comfortable with the lies and being an apologist for 45. Well, thank you so much, Molly, for being with us tonight on Voces Críticas. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule.
Oh, thank you for having me. I love your show. I'm a loyal listener.
All right, Molly, thanks so much.